Picture this, classic Hollywood perfect smiles, perfect lighting, and egos the size of the studio backlot. But when the cameras cut, some legends turned into full-time nightmares. Belts, tantrums, scandals, oh, it gets ugly fast. Welcome to the messiest jerk list in Tinseltown. Number 1, Charlie Chaplin, the genius with a dark side. Charlie Chaplin wasn't just a movie star. He was the movie star. The little tramp made the world laugh during its darkest hours, turning poverty, pain, and heartbreak into poetry. On screen, he was gentle, hopeful, almost saint-like, a man who tripped over his own feet just to lift everyone else up. But here is the uncomfortable truth Hollywood never liked to advertise. When the camera stopped rolling, the charm often disappeared with it. Behind the scenes, Chaplin ruled his sets like a tiny dictator in a bowler hat. He demanded absolute control over every frame, every gesture, every blink. Actors and crew described his productions as exhausting psychological marathons. Hundreds of takes for a single scene were not uncommon. Screaming fits, public humiliations, sudden firings. If you could not match the image in Chaplin's head, you were disposable. The magic on screen was often built on fear, tension, and raw exhaustion. Then there was his love life, if you can even call it that. Chaplin had a disturbing pattern of pursuing extremely young women. He married 2 wives who were just 16 years old, while he was already a powerful adult celebrity. Former partners later accused him of manipulation, emotional abuse, and constant infidelity. At 54, he married 18-year-old Una O'Neill, a decision so shocking it permanently destroyed her relationship with her famous father. Romance in Chaplin's world came with power imbalance built in. The scandals did not stop there. In the 1940s, Chaplin was dragged through court over a paternity case so explosive it dominated headlines nationwide. Even after blood tests proved the child was not his, the court ordered him to pay support anyway. The result was a legacy defined by contradiction. A man who preached humanity through film yet struggled to live by it in real life. Charlie Chaplin changed cinema forever, but the man behind the mustache left a legacy far messier than his movies ever showed. Number 2, Bing Crosby, the voice that hid a nightmare. Bing Crosby was the sound of comfort. The relaxed grin, the effortless charm, the voice that made everything feel safe and familiar. He was Christmas romance and calm wrapped into one smooth baritone. Crosby never looked dangerous. He never sounded angry. To the public, he was the kind of man you trusted without question. Which is exactly why the truth that surfaced later felt like a punch to the gut. According to his eldest son, Gary Crosby, life at home was ruled by fear, not warmth. Discipline was harsh, physical, and unpredictable. Punishment did not always require wrongdoing. Sometimes it just required being there. Gary described a childhood where silence was survival and obedience was mandatory. The smiling man America adored reportedly became cold, distant, and violent behind closed doors. This was not firm parenting. This was control disguised as order. The emotional fallout followed the Crosby children into adulthood. Depression, addiction, and a constant sense of failure haunted them for years. 2 of Bing's sons, Lindsay and Dennis. He ultimately chose to leave this world. While no tragedy has a single cause, Gary believed their upbringing left deep psychological scars that never healed. The man whose voice soothed millions could not give peace to his own family. Even in Hollywood, Crosby's easygoing image cracked under scrutiny. His famous on-screen partnership with Bob Hope looked playful and natural, but off-camera, the relationship was tense and distant. Friends later admitted the chemistry was largely performative. Crosby could be rigid, controlling, and emotionally closed off when the spotlight dimmed. The voice that defined warmth and nostalgia masked a legacy far darker than the songs ever suggested. Number 3, John Wayne, the hero who divided a nation. John Wayne was not just a movie star. He was an idea, the walking symbol of American toughness, confidence, and moral certainty. On screen, he never hesitated. He knew right from wrong, and he always stood his ground. For decades, audiences didn't just watch John Wayne movies. They believed in them. He represented the kind of man America told itself it was strong, fearless, and always on the right side of history. Off-screen, Wayne's certainty turned into something far less heroic. As he aged, his political views hardened, and he became increasingly outspoken in ways that shocked even his own era. In a now infamous interview, Wayne openly expressed beliefs rooted in racial superiority and argued that certain groups were not ready for equal power. These were not careless remarks. They were confident declarations delivered without apology. For many fans, it was the moment the cowboy hat slipped, revealing a man deeply out of step with the values his films seemed to celebrate. Wayne was just as uncompromising on set. Directors and co-stars often found him stubborn and combative. He resisted criticism, rejected direction, and believed his presence alone guaranteed authenticity. That arrogance reached its peak when he played Genghis Khan, a casting choice widely criticized even at the time. Wayne dismissed objections, entirely convinced he could play anyone anywhere without changing a thing. The result became a symbol of Hollywood ego and cultural blindness. Today, John Wayne's legacy is a battlefield. To some, he remains a classic icon of cinema. To others, he represents everything old Hollywood refused to confront about itself. Airports, statues, and film screenings bearing his name spark walkouts and protests. Decades after his death, Wayne still provokes argument, anger, and debate. Few stars manage to look so heroic on screen, while leaving behind such a complicated and polarizing truth off it. Number 4. Bette Davis, the queen who ruled by fear. Bette Davis did not ask for attention. She took it. With those unblinking eyes and that cutting voice, she dominated every scene she entered. While other stars relied on beauty or charm, Davis relied on force. She was intense, unapologetic, and brutally honest. Audiences called her powerful. Studios called her bankable. But behind the applause, many people simply called her terrifying. On set, Davis had a reputation for explosive confrontations and zero patience for anyone she considered incompetent. Arguments could erupt over lighting, dialogue, or tone, and once she started, there was no stopping her. One famous dinner confrontation ended with a verbal assault so vicious it reportedly cleared half the restaurant. When it was over, Davis calmly returned to her meal like nothing had happened. This was not a bad day. This was her personality. Her behavior created such tension that it crossed into something darker. During one production, someone poisoned her eye wash, forcing police to investigate the set. No one was ever charged. When authorities asked who might be responsible, the director allegedly replied that almost everyone on the cast and crew had a motive. That single comment said more about Davis's working relationships than any headline ever could. Then came her legendary war with Joan Crawford. While filming Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, their hatred turned the set into a psychological battleground. Costumes were altered to cause pain. Props were weaponized. Each woman looked for new ways to make the other suffer while cameras rolled. The performances were unforgettable. The experience was unbearable. Bette Davis remains one of the greatest actresses in film history, but her legacy proves that brilliance and cruelty often shared the same spotlight. Number 5, Mickey Rooney, the golden boy who never grew up. Mickey Rooney was Hollywood's original miracle kid. He sang, danced, joked, and smiled his way into America's living rooms before most children could read. Studios sold him as wholesome, energetic, and lovable. For years, he was the face of optimism during hard times. Audiences saw a harmless entertainer with endless charm. What they did not see was how quickly that charm curdled once the spotlight stopped protecting him. As an adult, Rooney's personal life became a non-stop headline factory. 8 marriages, countless affairs, and explosive relationships followed him for decades. He treated commitment like a revolving door and chaos like a lifestyle choice. Friends and colleagues described him as loud, egotistical, and exhausting to be around. The boy next door grew into a man who believed rules simply did not apply to him. The real damage came when Rooney decided to tell his own story. In his autobiography, he exposed deeply personal details about fellow stars, without restraint or remorse. He bragged about affairs named names and shared intimate moments that were never his to reveal. He openly discussed the private lives of women he had been involved with, crossing lines. Even Hollywood gossip rarely touched. What should have been reflection turned into public score settling. Later accusations only deepened the discomfort around his legacy. Reports painted Rooney as aggressive, self-absorbed, and incapable of taking responsibility. Claims about inappropriate behavior with much younger actresses surfaced and remained disputed, but they added to an already troubling picture. On screen, Mickey Rooney made America laugh. Off-screen, he left behind a reputation defined by excess, betrayal, and a refusal to ever truly grow up. Number 6, Jerry Lewis, the clown who crossed the line. Jerry Lewis built his career on chaos. High-pitched voices, wild faces, bodies flung across the room like rubber. Audiences loved him because he looked fearless, ridiculous, and completely out of control. He became one of the biggest comedy stars in America and later reinvented himself as a tireless fundraiser, raising enormous sums for charity. To the public, Lewis was a lovable man-child with a big heart. To many who worked with him, he was something else entirely. Behind the scenes, Lewis was notoriously difficult. Interviews often turned hostile, especially if a question bruised his ego. He talked down to reporters, dismissed younger comedians, and treated criticism as a personal attack. Over time, his opinions grew harsher and more out of step with the world around him. He made demeaning remarks about women in comedy and doubled down when challenged, insisting he was right simply because he was Jerry Lewis. His famous charity telethons also became a source of controversy. Critics accused him of exploiting people with disabilities by portraying them as objects of pity rather than dignity. Lewis rejected the criticism outright, convinced that raising money justified his approach. The backlash followed him for years, slowly reshaping how the public viewed what was once considered untouchable goodwill. Then there was his bitterness. Feuds with fellow comedians turned personal and ugly, especially his long-running conflict with Joan Rivers. What began as professional tension escalated into public insults and private threats that shocked even hardened Hollywood veterans. By the end of his life, Jerry Lewis was remembered not just for making people laugh, but for how often he alienated, offended, and pushed others away. The man who mastered slapstick comedy struggled to understand where the joke was supposed to end. Number 7, Errol Flynn, the rebel who burned too fast. Errol Flynn was Hollywood's ultimate bad boy fantasy. Handsome, fearless, and effortlessly charming, he turned sword fights and daring escapes into pure romance. On screen, he was the man every hero wanted to be, and every audience adored. Adventure followed him everywhere. But unlike the characters he played, Flynn never knew when to stop running toward danger. Off-camera, Flynn's appetite for excess became legendary. Alcohol, drugs, and non-stop partying defined his daily routine. Studios tried to control him. Friends tried to warn him, and none of it worked. His recklessness spilled into every corner of his life, turning his reputation from charming rogue into uncontrollable liability. Hollywood loved his image, but it quietly feared the man behind it. The scandals only made things worse. Flynn was dragged into multiple court cases involving underage girls, accusations so serious they nearly destroyed his career. Although he was acquitted, the damage to his image never fully faded. The trials exposed a darker side of his lifestyle and raised questions that even his star power could not erase. For many, the heroic swashbuckler was permanently replaced by suspicion and discomfort. By the time his career slowed, Flynn's body had already paid the price. Years of abuse left him physically broken, aging far faster than his peers. He died at just 50 years old, his health resembling that of a man decades older. Errol Flynn lived exactly how he performed: loud, reckless, thrilling, and doomed to crash. His legend remains iconic, but it is also a warning about what happens when charisma outruns self-control. Number 8. Zsa Zsa Gabor, the diva who never said sorry. Zsa Zsa Gabor treated fame like oxygen. She did not act her way into relevance so much as she floated through Hollywood on confidence alone. With her accent, jewels, and perfectly timed one-liners, she became famous for being famous long before that was a career path. To fans, she was glamorous and outrageous. To people who knew her personally, she could be exhausting, demanding, and impossible to please. Behind the scenes, Gabor was obsessed with image and control. Assistants and acquaintances described her as dismissive and emotionally distant, especially toward anyone who failed to meet her standards. That attitude spilled into real life in dramatic fashion when she was arrested for slapping a police officer during a traffic stop. Instead of showing regret, Gabor brushed it off publicly, treating the incident like a joke. Accountability was never part of the brand. Her most painful story played out away from the cameras. Gabor's relationship with her daughter Francesca Hilton slowly collapsed as her daughter rejected the glamorous lifestyle her mother demanded. When Francesca later struggled financially and emotionally, the support never came. Despite carrying one of the most famous last names in America, she lived her final years in near poverty and isolation. The contrast between public luxury and private neglect could not have been more brutal. Zsa Zsa Gabor lived exactly how she wanted, unapologetic and unfiltered. She never softened, never explained, and never backed down. To some, that made her iconic. To others, it made her cruel. Her legacy is a reminder that confidence without compassion can leave a trail of damage that no amount of diamonds can hide. Number 9. Gene Kelly, the perfectionist who left bruises. Gene Kelly looked like pure joy in motion. He danced through rainstorms, smiled through impossible choreography, and made athletic grace look effortless. To audiences, he was optimism with tap shoes. Every leap felt light. Every grin felt sincere. Kelly sold the fantasy that hard work was fun and that brilliance came without pain. The truth behind the scenes was far less cheerful. Rehearsals with Kelly were notorious. He demanded absolute precision and pushed dancers beyond their limits. Partners later recalled leaving the studio exhausted, sore, and sometimes visibly bruised. Kelly believed greatness required suffering, and he rarely softened his approach. Passion easily turned into intimidation. Perfection was not a goal. It was an expectation, and failing to meet it came with consequences. His intensity extended beyond the dance floor. Colleagues described him as controlling and impatient, especially when challenged by directors or co-stars. When things did not go his way, frustration took over. The friendly image he projected to the public often disappeared during production, replaced by a sharp temper and rigid authority. Working with Gene Kelly could elevate a career, but it could also drain the life out of you. Late in his life, rumors and controversies complicated his legacy, further casting shadows that never fully lifted. While some accusations were disputed, they added to an already complicated portrait. Gene Kelly remains one of cinema's greatest dancers, but his story proves that elegance on screen does not always reflect kindness off it. Sometimes the brightest smiles are powered by the hardest pressure. Number 10, Milton Berle, the king of laughs who stole the crown. Milton Berle loved being the loudest man in the room. In the early days of television, that worked perfectly. He moved fast, talked faster, and filled the screen with oversized confidence. Audiences crowned him Mr. Television, and for a while he truly was untouchable. Berle did not just want laughs, he wanted all of them, and he wanted them aimed squarely at himself. Behind the scenes, that hunger turned ugly. Berle developed a reputation for taking jokes that were not his and delivering them as if they were. Younger comedians whispered about it. Veterans complained about it. But few dared challenge him publicly. In comedy, stealing material is a cardinal sin, and Berle was accused of committing it repeatedly while smiling for the cameras. As television evolved, Berle struggled to share the spotlight. His infamous hosting stint on Saturday Night Live became a cautionary tale. He ignored writers, pushed outdated routines, and tried to dominate every moment. The result was chaos. The episode bombed so badly, it was quietly buried, and Berle was banned from returning. A legend had become a liability overnight. Even late in life, the pattern remained. During a televised appearance with RuPaul, Berle's dismissive and crude behavior reportedly crossed the line, turning a playful moment into an uncomfortable one. For all his influence, Milton Berle left behind a complicated legacy. He helped build television comedy, but his ego often did more damage than any bad joke ever could. Number 11, Alfred Hitchcock, the master of suspense who ruled through fear. Alfred Hitchcock taught the world how to be afraid. With a slow smile and a calm voice, he turned everyday moments into nightmares. Showers, staircases, birds, even silence itself became weapons in his hands. Audiences trusted him completely. If Hitchcock was in control, terror felt elegant, intelligent, and safe. But for many who worked with him, that sense of safety ended the moment the cameras rolled. Behind the scenes, Hitchcock's need for control crossed into obsession. He fixated on his leading ladies, especially blonde actresses he believed fit his ideal image. He dictated how they dressed, how they spoke, and even how they behaved off-set. Some actresses later described feeling watched, tested, and psychologically cornered. Compliments came with conditions. Attention came with expectations. If a woman resisted his influence, Hitchcock could turn cold, cruel, and vindictive. The most infamous example was actress Tippi Hedren. During the filming of The Birds, Hitchcock allegedly subjected her to relentless emotional manipulation. He isolated her, intimidated her, and refused to protect her during dangerous scenes. Hedren later claimed he intentionally put her at risk and sabotaged her career when she rejected his advances. Roles disappeared. Opportunities dried up. Hollywood doors quietly closed, all because she said no. Hitchcock's films remain masterpieces studied and celebrated decades later. His influence on cinema is undeniable, but the fear he created was not limited to the screen. For some, working with him meant living inside one of his movies, tense, powerless, and trapped. Alfred Hitchcock perfected suspense for audiences, but he also perfected control in real life. And that is the part of the story that still makes people uncomfortable today. Number 12. Frank Sinatra, the smooth voice with a violent temper. Frank Sinatra sounded like confidence. The voice was silk smooth, the image razor sharp, the attitude effortlessly cool. He was the definition of swagger, a man who made heartbreak feel glamorous and power feel natural. On stage and on screen, Sinatra looked untouchable, the kind of star who owned every room he walked into. But off camera, that cool image cracked fast, and what came out was anger, intimidation, and control. Sinatra was famously volatile. He could explode over the smallest slight, screaming at assistants, threatening executives, and lashing out at anyone he felt disrespected him. Journalists learned quickly to tread carefully. Those who wrote stories he did not like often received late-night phone calls or quiet warnings. Sinatra did not just dislike criticism. He treated it as a personal attack that demanded retaliation. His temper followed him into his personal relationships. Friends, lovers, and even colleagues described him as possessive and emotionally aggressive. Arguments could turn physical. Loyalty was demanded, not earned. When Sinatra felt betrayed, he did not forgive easily. He cut people off completely or made their lives difficult through his influence. In an industry built on favors and access, that kind of power could be devastating. Then there were the rumors that never fully went away. Sinatra's alleged connections to organized crime figures haunted his reputation for decades. Whether exaggerated or not, the fear around his name was real. People believed crossing Frank Sinatra came with consequences. He remains one of the greatest voices in American music. But behind the romance and rhythm lived a man fueled by rage, pride, and a need to dominate. The songs were smooth. The man was anything but. Number 13, Clark Gable, the king who ruled in silence. Clark Gable was Hollywood royalty. The mustache, the confidence, the effortless masculinity. Studios called him the king of Hollywood, and audiences believed it. On screen, Gable embodied charm and authority, the man who always got what he wanted and deserved it. He represented power without apology. But behind that carefully built image was a story Hollywood worked very hard to keep quiet. The most troubling chapter involves actress Loretta Young. During the early 1930s, the two worked together, and years later, Young privately revealed that Gable had assaulted her. The result was a pregnancy that could have destroyed her career in an era obsessed with purity and appearances. To protect Gable and the studio system, Young was sent away, hidden from the public, until she could return with a carefully staged adoption story. The lie lasted decades. Young carried that secret for most of her life. The emotional toll was enormous. She raised her daughter in silence, bound by contracts, fear, and a system designed to protect powerful men at all costs. Gable never publicly acknowledged the child. The studios did not intervene to seek justice. They intervened to erase the problem. In classic Hollywood, image mattered more than truth, and Clark Gable's image was untouchable. Gable continued his career unscathed, celebrated as a legend until his death. Only long after did the full story begin to surface, forcing audiences to confront what had been hidden in plain sight. Clark Gable remains an icon of cinema, but his legacy carries a heavy reminder. Sometimes the greatest power in Hollywood was not fame or talent, but silence. Number 14. Marlon Brando, the genius who destroyed everything around him. Marlon Brando did not just change acting. He blew it apart. Raw emotion, mumbling delivery, and dangerous intensity made him feel real in a way Hollywood had never seen. On screen, he was electric, magnetic, impossible to ignore. Directors called him a once-in-a-generation talent. Actors worshipped him. Audiences felt like they were watching something alive. But that same intensity made Brando almost unbearable in real life. On set, Brando was notoriously cruel and dismissive. He mocked co-stars, ignored scripts, and showed up unprepared simply because he could. He tested people for his own amusement, pushing buttons to see who would break first. Directors were humiliated. Crew members were exhausted. If Brando felt bored, he made sure everyone else suffered with him. Genius was his excuse, and Hollywood let him use it. His personal life was even darker. Brando treated relationships like experiments, manipulating lovers emotionally and discarding them without remorse. He had countless affairs and children he struggled to care for. His home life collapsed into chaos, addiction, and violence. The tragedy reached its peak when his son shot and killed his daughter's boyfriend, a moment that shattered the family beyond repair. Brando blamed himself, but the damage was already done. By the end of his life, Brando was isolated, overweight, and bitter. The man who once redefined masculinity became a cautionary tale about unchecked power and self-destruction. Marlon Brando remains one of the greatest actors in film history. But behind the legendary performances was a man who burned every bridge he crossed and left devastation where admiration once lived.